Hi, welcome to another video in my series on partnership issues. Today I want to talk about planning compensation. Now what I want to do is very quickly lay out the steps if you want to get a partnership issue worked out that's related to compensation. Follow these steps. I'm going to give them to you in the order that you should proceed. Let's get started. So the first thing we want to identify is whether there's an issue. So sometimes people say, look, we've been in business 5 years, we've been struggling, we haven't taken money out, it's time we start talking about salaries. And there is no issue, it's just time to do it. Other times people call me and they say, look, we've been in business for a certain amount of time, the business is doing well. My partner thinks he works harder than I do, and we've got a little conflict going on. And we want to get a compensation plan set up, but we're having some disagreements. So that's the first thing you want to identify. Is there an issue? Just identify it. It'll affect your course later. Now, the next thing you want to look at is how has compensation been handled so far? Has it been agreeable? Or has there been some tension, or has there been no compensation so far? That's something to pay attention to, and I'll tell you why in a second. The next thing is we want to consider if the business is changing. If the business is doing better and better and better and better, and it's growing rapidly, you want to think ahead a bit and say, well, if we're going to set salaries of $50,000 each for this year, we better set some sort of upscale as the business grows, or make decisions about whether you want to reinvest back in the business to continue to fuel the growth. The other thing to consider, of course, is if the business is declining, if things are slowing down, or if they go up and down, you want to take that into consideration. Now, when people call and say, can you help us work out some compensation thing, normally there's a reason that they're calling. There's something is driving the need to address this now. Either you've never done it before and you just wake up to the fact that you need to do it, or there's some friction, there's something, but you want to get your head wrapped around what's driving the need to do this now. Now, remember this, the longer you've done something a certain way, the harder it is to change it. So if you've been evenly splitting the profit and now one partner is working more hours or harder or doing something else more intense than one of the other partners, and there's a need to pay one partner more than the other, or one thinks they should get more than the other, it's harder to make a change if you've been doing something a certain way for a while. So if it's been even for 10 years and now you want to go into say a 70-30 arrangement, that becomes a lot more difficult. If you've been 50-50 for 6 months of a new business startup and now you want to make a shift, it's easier to make a change. So the longer you've been doing it in a certain way, the harder it's going to be to change. We'll always want to keep that on the radar as you enter into any kind of discussion. Now, the next thing we want to think about is how many partners are involved in the business. Typical business partnership. Now, I'm not talking about a sole proprietor here that's trying to figure out how much to pay himself. These are partnership decisions. All right. So most partnerships are two partner businesses. So if you have two partners in a business, that's one scenario to deal with. If you have more than two working partners, by working partners, I mean people that are participating in the business that will be part of this compensation, not limited partners. We'll deal with them in a second. But if you have more than two working partners in your business, you want to really think things through. It gets astronomically more difficult as we add partners. Now, I've worked with partnerships of 6, where you have 6 people in a relatively small business. A business with 6 partners and revenue of less than $1 million. Now, when you have $1 million in revenue and 6 partners, there's not a lot of pie to divide up there. But, the idea is that the business will grow, but hopefully it'll grow a lot, because $1 million in revenue, when you deduct expense and get down to profit, there isn't a lot left for 6 people. Another thing you want to think about is define who the working partners are. Now, I've had people call and they say, well, we've got 6 partners in our business. I say, well, that's a lot. Tell me about it. And well, Uncle Harry put some money in, and Grandpa put some money in, and Dad threw in some money. I say, well, do they participate in the business? Are they working in the business? No, they're not. So you want to define what a working partner is. You also want to look at what you've done up to now. So if you've made distributions to your limited partners, and now we're going to start taking salaries, so their distribution is going to go down, you definitely want to take that into consideration. Anything that affects the parties to this operation that might be impacted, we want to take that into consideration. So we really want to get our head around what's been done up to now. Remember, I said earlier, change is more difficult the longer you've done something a certain way. The other thing is we want to look at how the dynamic is working so far. In other words, how do the partners do in their working relationship? Do they get along great? Is there great communication, no problems? Or, is there a little friction in there? Do things start to get a little dicey when big things come up? You want to be realistic about this. I always hear from people, I say, well, we don't really have a problem. Then 3 months later, they're telling me that the business is coming apart because of some big conflict. Be realistic about that. If there's a little tension, that's not a crime. This happens. Sometimes there is just a little tension in making big decisions with other people. So be realistic about it. And if now is the time for a change, in other words, you're trying to define this compensation concept and how you're going to do it, and you're going to change things. We're going to go from 50-50 to 60-40. What's driving that? Is it ego? Is there some need? I've been involved in a compensation discussion, and I find out that somebody has a medical issue and they just need to make more money to cover something. So we want to understand, what are the drivers? Why has this come up? And is there anything that makes the inequity more important? It's what's behind it. All right. Now, as I said before, we want to talk about the working partners, participating partners, and limited partners. Now, generally the terms used are general partners and limited partners. Now, if you have limited partners, if Uncle Harry threw a few bucks into the business, we want to understand what Uncle Harry's expectations are. Does he think that he's going to get paid back in 2 years? Does he think that he's going to get 10% of the profit from now on? Does he think that he's entitled to something? I mean, what are his expectations? Even though he just put money into the business as an investment, maybe it's a note, maybe he just put it in and you haven't really documented anything, you still want to understand what his expectations are. Also, we want to understand whether he has voting rights. Does he have say in the business, or is he just a silent investor? This is very important because you can sit down with the 2 working partners and they can say, well, we're 50-50 and Uncle Harry just put some money, and then you find out Uncle Harry is not happy that you're taking out salaries before you pay him back. And he thinks he has a vote in the business, and since he put the money in, he thinks he has a big vote, and that can be an opening for problems. So we want to deal with the limited partners first. We want to understand what their rights are, what you've given them, and what their expectations are, what they think their rights are. Even if that's not it, we want to understand it so that we don't end up in a mess because somebody expects something that wasn't clearly spoken. All right, so we want to get those limited partners cleared up first. And then we deal with your fully participating partners, your general partners. We want to be careful about salaries that fully deplete profit, primarily because of the limited partners. All right, so if we take all the profit and divide it 50-50 between the 2 of us who are doing all the work, the business becomes 0 profit. And then Uncle Harry sitting over there is thinking, well, hey, I thought I was going to get, a piece of the action each year that you do well, but you guys are depleting the profit. So we want to be real careful about that. The other thing is, if we deplete the profit, we may have an unexpected expense, and we've already taken it as salary. So we want to just be careful about the salaries depleting the profit. So don't look at the profit and say, okay, we made $100,000, so we each get 50, and that's that. Leave a little in the business, even though your CPA may say, well, there's a straight pass-through, so this is your allocation because you're not a corporation. That's another issue entirely. I'm just saying, when you plan salaries, don't fully deplete your profit. Now, we've thought about these things, and we have to have the conversation with our partner or partners, depending on how many you have. How do we approach the subject? Well, even if there's no change, I recommend that you have discussions about compensation. It's healthy. It teaches you to learn how to discuss sensitive issues, and believe me, talking about money is a sensitive issue. And it brings definition. Now, when I use the word definition, I mean by defining agreements. So to bring definition, I mean if we're just splitting the money 50-50, I think we ought to document that and put it as part of our partnership agreement. And if you don't have a partnership agreement, we should go to work on getting a partnership agreement in place to cover some other issues that I'll talk about in other videos. But it's good, even if there's no tension, there's no problem, you're going to keep doing things the same way. It's still a good idea to talk about it, draft some agreements, sign them, and make them part of your partnership agreement. And like I say, if you don't have a partnership agreement, make them memos of understanding or just draft agreements. Just write them up and say, we hereby agree. That avoids a lot of problems later. Okay, so back to how do you approach the subject? Just say, look, we've been doing this, it works, and I think it would be a good idea for us to put it in writing in case something happens. Now, all of this stuff is great, but there are some other things that may affect our plans, all right, besides just what we agree to. The structure of the business may influence how compensation is handled. Your CPA may have some input on that, may say, well, that's, if we make some of this as distribution of profit and some as salary, it might impact your taxes, self-employment tax, capital gains, corporate tax. There's a number of things that enter in. So we may need to consult with your accountant, your CPA, tax attorney, however you do your financial accounting. They may have some input. Now, what is the basis? How do we arrive at what we should be paid? Now, I mentioned this for the business that's been operating for 3 or 4 years. People are not taking a salary, and then they call me up and say, it's time for us to start paying ourselves, but we don't know how much we should pay. Well, there's a number of things we can look at as the basis of compensation. We can distribute profit. So if the business has $100,000 of clear profit, two partners, we can say we're going to split the profit 50-50. We each get $50,000. That's pass through. Or if we're paying taxes as a corporation, we'll set that up as salaries and we'll pay it monthly. You can have set amounts. We can just set salaries. Maybe the business makes $500,000 a year, but the 2 partners or 3 partners are going to take $100,000 a year each, and the rest will sit in the business and accumulate. That's a possibility as well. So we can take set salaries. We can have performance basis. So we can say, well, I do the management of the business. I make the tough decisions. You do the sales. So I think if the sales grow by 20%, you should get a $10,000 bonus. And I think if I make great decisions and the business profit improves by 10%, then I should get a $10,000 bonus. So if the profit goes up 10% and the sales go up 10%, we both get a $10,000 bonus. So we can put some performance objectives in for ourselves, even though we're partners. Now, Something that's really overlooked by most people is that we can do a combination of these things. We can have distribution of profit, and we can have salary, and we can have performance bonuses, and we can work out combinations. So in other words, we could say, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take very low salaries. We're going to take $20,000 each, which isn't a lot. And then if the business makes over $100,000, we're going to distribute half the profit between us. And if the profit increases by 25%, we're going to take the other half of the profit and distribute that. So we can base it on the pure distribution. We can set salaries. We can do performance bonuses, and we can make combinations of this stuff. So there's a lot of creativity that can come into it. And a lot of these things can be used to reduce tension. So when you have maybe a partner that doesn't work much in the business and another partner that works 60 hours a week that feels they should make more, we can build incentives in that take down the tension. So we can say, well, let's both have a $50,000 salary, but if the business increases by 30% this year, it's because I'm doing all this work, and then I want to get a $100,000 bonus if I grow the business by 30%. And then you don't have to work much, and I'll do all the work and agree to that. So there are ways that you can make disparate levels of compensation more palatable. Now, there are a lot of other considerations when it comes to compensation. Holiday pay, vacation, required weekly hours, travel. Are there other benefits? In other words, if one person is responsible for sales and another one does mostly administration, is the sales guy out playing golf 4 days a week? And believe me, I hear this. I get from one partner, he says, well, the guy's playing golf every day, and we got a country club membership so we could entertain some of our clients, and he's playing golf every day while I'm working. Well, that may be a compensation consideration. We may be able to say, well, that's worth something, and that's sure beats working in the office every day. So we need to look at these things. The other thing we need to look at is the pay continuation. For example, if one of the partners becomes disabled, do we continue paying him forever? Or do we say we pay for a certain amount of time and then we begin a buyout? What about death? Do we just pay his estate, his salary, even though the person is gone from the face of the earth? Do we just keep paying that salary? You may have to at some point replace that partner if they're working and participating. You can't afford to pay both. So these are things that should be considered. Now, what about non-performance? I've had situations that people have called me up and they say, my partner's just quit working. He doesn't even come in. He doesn't even go to the office anymore. Do we keep paying them or what? These things need to be addressed. How do we base the compensation? Well, expectations are always key to avoiding conflict. We want to talk about the expectations. You can distribute by ownership. You can distribute by performance, by company income. As I said before, there's all kinds of combinations that can be worked. We can distribute by effort. We can build incentives in. These things have to be discussed. But what is important here on this slide that I want you to grasp is expectations. Deal with expectations before putting proposals on the table, because if somebody expects that everything's going to be even Steven from here out, whether I work or not, and then you propose making a lot more money, and since the other partner doesn't work, there's going to be a gap there, you're asking for trouble. So you want to deal with expectations. You want to sit down and say, what do you think we ought to do? What are your expectations? And then bring everything out and start looking for your working combination. But deal with expectations first. Now, definition. Now, remember I said before, when I use the term definition, I'm talking about getting things defined on paper. So you want to avoid a future dispute in your partnership, get your agreements in writing. Even if you plan even distribution of profit, and we just say, okay, all the money the business makes, we just split 50-50, we just do it. It's still a good idea to get that in writing and that you guys both agree, or all the partners in this business agree? And then we should define some terms. Now, the lawyer will tell you when you have any kind of agreement, they always start by definition of terms. You know, the contract says who it's between and, you know, generally what this is about. And then they define the terms. So what does that mean? What are profits? Is that after all expense, after tax, before tax? And does the accountant estimate what the tax will be? We split the profit and then the business pays tax. Does the business pay our taxes? How does this work? What are the definitions? Profits for what? A calendar year, a fiscal year, a quarter, a month? Do we distribute these profits monthly? You know, define it. We also want to take a look at other expenses that start looking like income. I mentioned that earlier, but say you have one of the partners is handling the sales and they're out on the road, and I'm working from the office. So I'm in the office every day, and at, you know, I work 60 hours a week. At 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, I go home tired, but at least I go home. The other partner's working 30 hours a week, but they live on the road. They don't get to go home. And that person says, well, you know, this beats the heck out of my car. I'm driving 100,000 miles a year. The business should provide me with the vehicle. Well, I want a car too. Well, you live 2 blocks from here and you just go home at the end of the day. You know, you need to get those things defined. If a car is in the picture, then do both people need a car? Is it part of the compensation, or is it necessary expense, or is it considered a perk? You know, you want to talk about things that start looking like compensation that aren't, okay? Expenses that start looking like compensation. Let me mention one other thing about this car. In the situation where you have somebody out in the field doing sales and somebody working from the office, the car thing comes up a lot, and I've seen situations where one of the partners will just buy a car, and then they tell their partner, look, my car is worn out. I'm on the road every day. I'm taking clients out to lunch or dinner or golf or whatever, and I need a decent vehicle. So I bought a car. Now the other partner immediately assumes that they need a new car too. So it's good to have conversation. Like I say here, be careful of expenses that start to look like compensation. Draft an agreement. If you want, you can draft up notes, give it to your attorney. Your attorney can draft it into a formal part of your partnership agreement. If you don't have a partnership agreement, your attorney can draft this as an agreement between partners. And if you get a partnership agreement, you can make it part of. And if you don't want to go through that kind of expense, you can just write up some notes, agree to it, sign it, both. And that's better than nothing. Anything written is better than nothing. So if a dispute breaks out or something happens to one of the partners, at least you've got some definition. There's a document you can pull out that say this is what we agreed to. All right. And again, just to recap, setting the compensation can be a distribution of profits, it could be a salary, it could be salary based on some factor like the number of hours worked or productivity. We can have bonuses, you know, based on sales, based on profit of the business, whatever. And we can have any combination of these things. The other thing we want to do is set review dates. So we want to say this is in effect until 3 years, and then we're going to adjust it. If we fail to adjust it, then it will go up by 5% per year until we reach agreement on an adjustment. That way, at least you have some built-in increase. You know what happens if you don't adjust it. It doesn't just end, you know, because that's bad news. And then you have a review date to say, when do we look at this? And that can be annually, as long as you put a provision in there of what do you do if you don't do the review. And remember, we can do any combination. Now, how do you do it? How do you go about this? Well, you do the steps I just outlined, then you sit down and talk about it. Stay in this order that I've given you. You know, deal with the limited partners, address the expectations, you know, get some ideas down on paper and sit down and have your conversation. When you have your conversation, you find agreement on things, draft up your notes, and then have your attorney either make them into a formal partnership agreement or just draft agreements and have the partners sign. That's the outline of the process right there. Now, if you run into tension or you find that, I think we can do this conversation, but I don't know if we might fall into an argument if we do it, call me. This is what I do. I moderate discussions. I'm not a mediator. Two partners come to a mediator and they say, we have a conflict. One tells their side, the other one tells their side, and the mediator makes a decision and they both agree to abide by it. I don't do that. I moderate. So I would sit down and conduct the dialogue for you. So I take the heat. I keep things cool. So when one partner says, I should make more than him, he doesn't do half the work I do, I can say, well, let's explore that. How do you feel about that, Joe? And we talk it through. I can also give you ideas based on the experience I have. I've seen a lot of situations, so I can bring some creativity to your dialogues and absorb the tension. Also, I can work with your CPA, your attorney, any of the professionals that you work with in your business to make sure that things are legal for your state, that they're in compliance with any partnership or operating agreement as part of your business already. So, I'm willing to work with other people, but the main takeaway here is you have somebody that can take the heat. So by moderating the discussion, there is no tension between the partners because you can focus that on me. Now, to wrap this up, the most important thing when you talk about compensation, above all, be fair. All right? If you say, I think I should make more because I work more, justify it. Have something that we can point to that says this is the reason why. Be fair. Not just because I'm better than him or something, I've heard it all, believe me. The most important thing is to be fair. At the very first whiff that things are not fair, everything changes. People go on defense. They start to get a little hedgy. They start looking out for their own interests. Things fall apart. Be fair. This is what I do in my business every day as I look for fairness. So remember the 3 E's, the little symbol down there is when I get into a situation, I want education. So I want to teach people different ways and good ways of doing things. Ethics. I want to make sure that we're doing things right and fair and ethically for all parties that will be affected by anything that I do. And finally, excellence. So do we have the best possible agreement we can make for everybody? Education, ethics, excellence. Those are the 3 E's of business that I follow. That's it. Thank you. If you want to talk about compensation or setting up a compensation arrangement between you and your partners, give me a call. I'd love to do it.